Here, actually, there's a practical side to philosophy too, but that's absolutely excellent. I think as a summary of philosophy, I should actually talk a little bit about philosophy, since this is a philosophy course. There's 5 basic broad subjects that philosophy studies. Logic is obviously one of those. Although you could also study logic in math courses often. Notice it ties into computer science, computer code writing, things of that sort. That's certainly where that goes today. But it's a traditionally old topic. Heck, if you're familiar with the New Testament, John, the Gospel of John starts off with, "In the beginning was the Word," and in Greek, which is the language the New Testament was originally in, Koine Greek, the word is logos, which basically means logic. So translating it as the Word is only one translation that you could have from that. You might also have translated it as, "In the beginning was order, and then chaos came," or there's lots of different ways of looking at it. So logic, that's considered a Greek element, and John's Gospel is considered the most philosophical of the Gospels, of the 4. There's lots of other Gospels today. They talk about Thomas, etc. But if you're interested in the original 4, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? John is the odd one, the very Greek philosophical gospel, whereas the other are so-called the synopticon, the one view, right? So logic, of course, traces itself way back. Logi, if we think of the German wise guy character that goes with Wotan or Odin, is apparently the closest the German pantheon had to logic, and so on. So there's all sorts of interesting things there. So when we're thinking about logic, it's not necessarily studying arguments and statements and things of that sort. It's also studying the nature of the logic of the universe, right? And if anything, what we hope is that the way our logic works through our language, through what we think of as reasoning, is somehow connected to the logic of the world, so that we're not just making stuff up. It's actually really that way. But of course, what we end up discovering is that there are lots of different logics, lots of different languages. It turns out, depending on whether you think language really structures how you think or not, there's arguments over that, if you're, say, Chinese, you're going to be thinking a different way than you would be if you were speaking English, because Chinese is structured so radically differently than Western European languages. A big problem, for example, is when we talk about true statements. When we say something is true, like this is a camera, right? That's a true statement, right? Everybody would agree? No problem, right? What I have done is given you a categorical statement, as Aristotle would have explained it, that I took a category of things, cameras, and said this particular thing is in the set of things that is a camera, right? So you look at it and you know, yes, the thing that I'm referring to is in the set of things called a camera, so that statement was true. Chinese can't do that because they don't have the verb to be. So you can't say this is a camera. You could say this, and you could say camera. Does that mean that they assume the is part? Well, we don't know. And there's lots of Chinese philosophers that have tried to figure that out. Since the time when missionaries first arrived in China and started trying to translate things, Euclid and Aristotle, and translate it so that the Chinese would have it. They were absolutely amazed when they got there and discovered that the Chinese didn't know about Aristotle. How could you not know about Aristotle? Gee, that's almost as silly as the missionaries from Boston that went to Hawaii and could not figure out why the people there weren't wearing clothing. And they brought their wool suits. And when it was October, they decided it's time to put the wool suits on because it's winter now. And by the way, they all started getting sick because they were overheated. That actually, if you ever visit Hawaii, visit the Bishop Museum in Oahu in Honolulu, and there's the suits, right? They literally wanted everyone. They dressed the king of the Hawaiians up in such a suit, So, it's not my fault. That was only in the 60s, roughly, and you know what? They were pretty stupid then. By the way, do I need to give you a trigger warning? I call some people stupid. It's just, sorry, I grew up finding out that I was stupid. So, when I see stupidity, I usually point out, hey, that's stupid, right? Sorry, I know that's politically incorrect, but I think political correctness is stupid. Sorry. That's recursion. But we'll explain that. Okay, so logic. When we study the Chinese language, is their language more appropriate to the way the world works, or is ours? There are folks that will argue, well, every language has its structure, every language accomplishes what they want. Maybe it's true that one language enables certain ways of viewing the world. A Chinese speaker will view the world in a way that's a lot less object-oriented and so on. It's kind of interesting, the psychological attempt to try to figure out what differences it makes in the way you view the world, depending on your language and so on. By the way, if you learn other languages, then what does that do to your brain, etc.? That's all pretty interesting too, right? But at the same time, the question then is, does one or another language map to the world better? Right. So is it clear, for example, that English is the better language to learn to speak today than Chinese if you want to be successful? There are way more people that speak Chinese, though, than English, right? There's all kinds of interesting things. When we get into translation and try to figure out, well, does that, tell us which language is more popular? It doesn't really work that way, because the only ones that were really into translation were English, French, and German. When you look at the other languages, they hardly do any translation, and if they do it into English, because they want to publish their books with an audience that reads them and spends money for them. So if you want to make money publishing a book, it's probably not going to be worth it to you if you publish it in Bantu, because I don't even know if there's a publishing house specifically for that. But you write your book and you try to get it translated into English so that you can have an audience for it, right? China has very few books translated into Chinese from other languages. When you study the Chinese, it makes sense why that's the case, because the Chinese don't think anybody else counts. China is the center of the world as far as China is concerned. It always has been, and everybody else is pretty much barbarians. That's essentially the way they look at things, right? It's kind of funny, actually, the kinds of things that happened over the history between them and the British, for example. And things of that sort, right? There's all kind and it's still a problem, of course. We just tried to have a trade agreement with China, right? Where Trump is trying to accomplish something and get what he feels is a more fair relationship between China and us. And they were close; they were all almost there, and then all of a sudden, it all went away. why did they do that? Why did they change their mind? Well, part of it might be that Chinese doesn't work the same way as Western European languages. They don't really have a true or false statement. They have, by the way, there's an interesting book trying to figure out, well, what do they have? It's kind of a pragmatist approach to things. There's a variety of things that are offered, and not like this is true and that's false, etc. There's instead a variety. I'm not sure how that works. I don't speak Chinese, so I've read some books about it, but I haven't actually learned Chinese. It's very difficult for me. So when we talk about logic, there's all kinds of interesting things associated with that, and with language, and with practicality, what works, and so on. And where is it going? How's it affecting your brain is another issue, right? Because if you think of your brain as a computer, right, as A.C. Grayling refers to our heads as your neck top. I think that's cute, right? Instead of a laptop, it's your neck top, right? What happens? In fact, what's the whole point of getting an education? You're transforming your brain, right? So if you pay your money and you think college is just a scam because you go, you don't feel like you're learning anything. You just get your transcript that has the courses on it, and then you go out and say, okay, I got my degree, now give me a job. What really happened other than you getting a student loan to cover all of this time that you spent there? What do you really get out of it? Well, if that's what your thinking is, and if that's all that you actually got out of your education, then you were scammed. You were right. You paid a lot of money for nothing, basically. But if what happens, of course, is that in each course you take, you learn something that totally amazes you and sends sparkles through your head, because all sorts of weird things are happening in your head because of what's going on in the classroom and what you're learning from it. And you come out of that classroom environment and out of that degree being a totally different person. And by the way, I've absolutely seen that. Seen young people coming into UAA, young, naive, high school graduates. They did great. They love their high school experience. They're, competitive and all sorts of things. 4 years later, they're mature, amazing adults that are heading off to law school and things of that sort. Amazing, right? And what did it, of course? Not only 4 physical years of living on the earth, but also all of the coursework that they took seriously and learned from as they developed their minds in order to accomplish all of that. And wow, that's amazing. Thanks to Facebook, by the way, I keep in touch with a lot of them, and it's amazing the things that they're doing out there. It's wow. Now, I'm not taking credit. Most of the time I was just sitting on the sidelines. It's a lot of reading. A lot of this is reading, because so I'll show you this. This is pretty interesting. This is see, I didn't even have to finish typing effect. It automatically went to it. So the Flynn effect. Have you ever heard of it? Yes?
Not that I can think of.
No? The Flynn effect. James Flynn, I actually know him. I've emailed him a couple times, but he's retired and lives in New Zealand. But he's a specialist on intelligence, written lots of different books. And in one of his books, he gave some data which another author named Charles Murray found really interesting. And Charles Murray began referring to that data as the Flynn effect. So James Flynn didn't call it the Flynn effect. Charles Murray called it the Flynn effect. But what the Flynn effect is, recognition that from one generation or one cohort really to the next, people were becoming more intelligent. measurably more intelligent. So, for example, I know that your minds are capable of thinking and solving problems much quicker than my mind, because I'm almost 68, and you're probably in your 20s, or thereabouts. Is that about right? So you're several cohorts away from me. Your IQ is probably roughly around 20 points higher than mine, my guess, right? And the question then, of course, and how do we know this? We've because of the various tests, IQ tests that we give. Doesn't mean that a specific individual, this is statistics, so you might have, obviously I have one son whose IQ is probably around 70. He had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We adopted him at 13 months. Thought he would be fine, but discovered over the years that he isn't. By the way, at the moment, he might still be in jail. I'm not sure. I knew he was in jail over the weekend down in Seattle. So I've learned a lot, by the way, by being his father about mental illness and things of that sort. But so what we're talking about, of course, is statistics. So we're looking at the cohort. But what we're seeing is that as a group, your intelligence, our human intelligence, is growing. And by the way, there's a wonderful TED Talk by James Flynn, I might show it, where he tries to explain why that might be. My personal thinking, though, is that you're constantly in touch with what I think of as the spirit world, the social media, right? If you think of that as the spirit world, that you're on the internet, you're on Facebook, you're emailing people, you're texting people, you're getting all kinds of apps and things that I don't even know what they are. So I don't know if you get, everything that Trump says immediately into your phone, or whatever, that kind of thing. I don't tweet, because I just think the sound Twitter, it sounds gay to me, which is okay. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I was raised where, when I admit it, I'm honest at least, it makes me feel, but I'm okay with it, it's just, in any case, you guys are connected all the time. Flynn talks about ancestors who were farmers that might not hear another human being speak except on Sundays, right? So their social media is like, whoa, Sundays where they get to, sing, Bach cantatas for 4 hours a Sunday or something, which are great, by the way. But at the same time, what if you think of your neck top as a muscle, just like any other muscle, muscles improve with use. Certain things you need pure oxygen. So if you're smoking, that's bad for your brain, right? Other smog-like things. I really wouldn't want to live in Beijing or other places with incredible smog. It's one of the reasons I live here. Theoretically, we have clean air here, right? Pollutants of other sorts. So if you're imbibing things that are not good for your body, that's probably going to, of course, impact your brain, that kind of thing. Your brain also needs protein. And oxygen, by the way, is helped by exercise. So make sure you're exercising. As you can see, I've given up that part of my career, exercising. And stimulation. Make sure you get lots of stimulation so that you're exercising your brain. And sleep. You also need sleep. So don't stimulate your brain while you're asleep. I know a lot of people that don't turn their phones off while they're asleep. My one daughter, for example, she's sleeps with her phone, and I'm pretty sure she often wakes up in order to respond to something. So sleep, pretty important. This is all pretty basic, right? But if you think about that, you put all that together, you can live till 100 and just absolutely be mentally amazing, right? Are geniuses born, or do we make them? Both? Well, you have to be born, or you're not going to grow up to be much of a genius, because you don't exist, right? So that's actually an inclusive set, right? But at the same time, just because you're born doesn't mean that you're going to become a genius, because you could be a dog, right? Right? That's pretty clear, right? Try teaching French to a dog. Roof, roof, le woof, le woof. They still go roof, roof. They don't switch to le woof, right? You know. And by the way, each language speaks dog differently. Russians, gaf, kaya, gaf, gaf. That's kind of fun. I think it depends on the kind of dogs they have. You know? My Saint Bernard, well, I'll have to show. I've got it recorded, so I could give you a hint of how Saint Bernards talk. Right? Very full voice, as you can imagine. Even though she's only 6, she's a puppy, and yet she speaks like that. I would argue that anybody can become a genius as long as you have a healthy body, healthy mind, and you get appropriate stimulation. Mozart became Mozart because he lived in a house that was loaded with music from when he was a little child. He was 4 years old and playing the violin already, right? So you could, and by the way, there are lots of people that do the same sort of thing to their kids, and their kids grow up to be amazing violinists too, right? And composers, and play all sorts of music and stuff like that, right? How many languages can you learn? How many languages do you speak? Anybody speak 3? 2? Just one? A lutic? It's just a T-shirt.
Yeah.
Shoot, I have an Aleutic dictionary. I look at it every once in a while, but it doesn't help. How many languages? Anybody?
1.5.
1.5? What's the half?
Spanish.
Oh, hablo español. By the way, that line got me a job for a while.
Yeah. Taco Bell?
I was a substitute for the school district for a while after I retired from the Army. I was teaching at UAA, but I also worked at Sears, which was where I got most of my money. But I also substituted for the school district. And I was down for foreign languages and social sciences, I think, whatever it was. Well, the one morning they called me up, and it was a real person, not the machine. And they called me up and they said, "Do you speak Spanish?" And I honestly said, "No hablo español." And she said, "Terrific, that's perfect." And they hired me to do Spanish immersion kindergarten. I had the worst headache that day of my life, because that whole day I was, of course, immersed in a Spanish-speaking environment with little kids that looked at me and knew that I was just trying to pretend that I could speak any Spanish. You know, I could not fool the kids, right? I learned a lot of Spanish with them. In fact, I did so well, they ended up calling me pretty regularly for Spanish immersion, not only at Government Hill, but also at Chugach, and that was kind of cool. $100 a day, right? I don't know what it is today. That was years ago. But no hablo español. What languages do you speak?
Spanish.
And English too. How well?
Fluent.
I meant to. Sorry, I shouldn't do that. Do you need to forgive me, or is that just funny? Okay, thank goodness. That's amazing. I didn't take Spanish on purpose because at the time, if you had spoken Spanish, you would have ended up in hot places where people shot at you. And I didn't want to go to those places. So I wanted to go to Europe, so I signed up for Russian. So Ya говорю по-русски. That was my main language in the Army. But I did take my test in German and passed that, and then I took my French test and I passed that. So the Army paid me for 3, so that's pretty cool. So je suis un polyglot, if that's French for I'm a polyglot. That makes sense. What languages do you speak?
Just one. I was born in Russia, but I was young and when I was adopted, so I completely forgot.
Yeah. No memory whatsoever. Where in Russia were you born?
Near St. Petersburg.
It used to be Leningrad, then Petersburg, and it's actually still St. Petersburg. Pretty amazing. Cool. But you should study Russian too. But there's no native, because you were born there, that all of a sudden,
Yeah, I
wake
tried
up.
to a couple of times, and it was just as hard as learning Spanish or another language for me.
There's a Doritos commercial where the baby speaks his first word. And it's like, duh, duh. And the father's all excited, oh, go ahead, da, da. And instead the kid goes, Doritos.
Oh my god.
Sorry, love that one. It was a great commercial. Are you enjoying this so far? I'm trying to be funny.
I am.
You are? Yes. Thank you. Okay, so you guys are smarter than me, statistically. But why, of course? Now, there is a problem, by the way, because even though you guys are smarter, you don't know as much. In general, you don't know as much. And the question is, why is that? That's because all the time you spend on the media, you're not reading. And still, as far as we know, the best way for you to get lots of information into your neck top is by reading. We get information by talking and listening, and movies is just absolutely, my grammar gets screwed up every once in a while. By the way, I was born in Philadelphia, so every once in a while I revert to my natural kind of talk, That just happens, Excuse me. Hamburger, cheeseburger, Rocky, However, how do we make sure that you keep your mind exercised by using all the contemporary devices? I said hello, Michaela. Sorry, that's your daughter's name, right?
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
that's okay.
But in any case, she's one that I'm thinking of, right?
What's that?
There's a person who has all this media, but does she read as much as she
Oh my
needs
gosh.
to?
Michaela's a voracious reader.
So that's good. But that's a worry, right? If you're distracted by the visual stimuli so much, and we know that that's transforming our brains. They argue about kids, how much visual stimulus from a video screen should a baby have? They're saying none. I'm not sure that's a good idea either, right? None. Not sure that that's really your best bet, right? But they are worried because what does it do to the brain? Because everything that goes into the brain, I would argue, stays in the brain.
Doesn't it influence the dopamine levels?
Well, we are trying to think of Antonio Damasio's expression, the feeling of what happens, right? So the feeling that we have with regard to everything that's happening to us are biochemicals doing their thing, right? So seeing a color stimulates a certain set of receptors and stimulates our biochemistry in a certain reaction. For example, when a guy sees a beautiful woman, he's happy. That's eye candy, right? I know politically that's not something we're supposed to say, but if we're honest, if you're a healthy male and you see a beautiful woman, you're enjoying that view. And you're going to have to control yourself in order to refrain from staring. You have to learn that. That's a self-control. And by the way, if you have brain problems and you don't have ability to self-control yourself, it's really hard for you to not stare at somebody. I'm not surprised that a lot of people that grow up in a country where all the women have to wear outfits where the only thing you could see is this, because they're wearing burqas all the time, right? And that if that's all they ever see of a woman, and then they move to Germany, and they're walking in the square with women that are wearing skirts that are high enough that they really need to shave. Are you offended? Sorry. You get the problem, right? You know, what sort of discipline have they had a chance to train themselves for in that kind of a situation? They haven't, right? Well, you get the idea. So, yeah, everything that goes on that you experience is a biochemical reaction. And so, of course, just looking at something, you're biochemically reacting to that. And that's transforming the way your brain works. Is it good for you or bad for you? I mean, you know, for example, if you're trying to train yourself to have lots of discipline by watching pornography, not good training, I don't think. That's kind of neat. St. Thomas Aquinas, argued that just the thought of a sin is bad for you, is the sin itself. And today, the way we study the brain and understand what goes on, when you're watching, say, a movie, and you're watching people doing something, you're imagining yourself doing the same thing that they are. It's called mirror neurons, right? So that, you know, the reason that we enjoy movies and enjoy watching people doing whatever, including violence, right? All those computer games where you're killing stuff. Wow. I mean, you're actually feeding the mental pathways that are associated with doing that. So how good is that for you, right, to do that? And that's something you have control over, what you're actually doing to yourself, right? So good habits, feeding good habits is good for your brain. Feeding bad habits is bad for it. Same thing with eating, which you can see. You like chocolate and salt and sugar, and you're going to get this instead of that or whatever. Yes?
When you say bad ways, what do you think would be like some effects of that? Say, if you see violence on TV so much, do you think that might make you a violent person? Or like, what would be the negative effects?
Well, they argue over that because, of course, when we look at how many people are playing violent games, and you look at how many people are going to schools and shooting people up, the connection doesn't really seem to be there. Because there are way more people that are playing those games than going to schools and shooting people, right? So if you're looking for a statistical relationship, it looks like you might actually be better off playing the violent games because then you're less likely to want to go and actually shoot people. On the other hand, the people that have played the violent games and then gone and shot people makes it look like that connection is there. So we don't know. I don't think we have a real good sense of what that connection is. But it is scary to me because I have a daughter that kills more people in an hour than I've even looked at, in my life practically, Granted, a lot of them look, the various games, but she's slashing and shooting, and that's constant. I remember what it felt like way back in '93, I guess. I remember playing a game on my PC that was called Hitler was at the very end. You end up shooting Hitler at the end. Wolfenstein, and I would get up from the chair and I would feel stiff from the calcium deposits, and whoa. So it clearly, physically, shook me up, because I didn't want to get killed. I wanted to get to the end, So you have to be right on the edge of your seat, to make sure you don't get killed by these, increasingly bigger, more loaded Germans, as you go. But real good question. That's a question that scientists are trying to figure out, because what should we do? I mean, that's as a profit-making business, computer gaming is the biggest compared to what used to be the entertainment. It's those games are really, and oh my goodness, if you think.
Is there any way to open a window or something? Is it when there's a hot?
No. You can take breaks though.
Is it hot in here?
It is hot.
Sabina, Zweierkind.
So cool you off.